I originally had a Let's Play-esque video series I wanted to continue, but felt like it was a real hassle. Felt stressed out making them, and felt like it took a lot more effort than, frankly, I wanted to put into anything. Then I learned over the years of the pandemic that nothing matters. So I could do whatever the hell I want. And using this information, we're going to be talking about goblins today. Goblins. Green, big-eared, larder-raiding menaces to societies and a lot of fantasy settings. Yeah, those. I'm going to talk about those. Well, okay, so more specifically, I want to talk about the settings that I'm most familiar with that have them, which is to say tabletop RPGs and video games. But before we get too deep on how my new professional position as a goblin reviewer on YouTube is my life, let's just cover some of the basics. Catch up those who don't know the hot goblin lore. So, this is what most people consider a goblin, also known as goblins, goblinos, goblins, and goblets, but only when talking about girl goblins. They're monsters from European folklore that really kind of just cover all mischievous monster needs. They commit petty theft, malicious assaults, and let's be honest, pranks. The kind of shit that you would tell a medieval peasant was a monster and not your kid throwing rocks at their window. Anywho, they were kind of under the same umbrella of make-believe creatures that, leprechauns, imps, kobolds, creatures that just did mischievous things to fuck with humans for laughs. Anyway, a man named Gary Gygax, known for creating this small little underground project, you probably haven't heard of it. It's called Dungeons and Dragons. He needed monsters to fill his world with. So after what I can only assume was a sweaty evening of reading mythology and folklore with his buddies in a card shop, he had a whole slew of monsters, which, let's be real, some are a lot cooler than others. Anyway, getting off topic. Goblins, and by extension the term goblinoids, were popularized by that funny man and his tabletop role-playing system about trying not to starve to death in a dungeon. And, since we're on the topic of D&D, let's just cover their version first. This will be the D&D Goblin video. And, I'm going to be breaking this video up into smaller sections for my own easy regurgitation and, by extension, your digestion. So I'm going to be like baby birding information down your throat. And I'm going to assume you're into it because you haven't stopped watching the video, buddy. In Dungeons & Dragons, goblins are a short race of goblinoid, reaching roughly 3 feet tall at their tallest, usually around 40-ish pounds, and when walking upright, their lanky, long noodle arms reach just past their knees. Generally speaking, they have a glazed-over look to their eyes, which is described as being either gold, red, or something in between, and are regularly described as, quote, hideously ugly. They have large, broad noses that sit on their face, and wide, pointed ears. Their mouths are filled with a series of small but sharp fangs that they use to eat their meats with. Their skin color can range from anything from red to yellow to green, really pretty much anything but, human skin tones. It's commonly seen that in a goblin tribe, however, they all will share the same skin tone. Depending on a lot of factors, your dungeon master and, setting, most importantly, goblins can either be their own race or a distant descendant of the Fae, kinda similar to gnomes and elves. And in modern run games, at the time of recording, I'm mostly referring to 5th edition D&D, really just date the episode, make sure that it's unwatchable in a few years. Goblins have specially adapted eyes that make them great at seeing in the dark. So good that they can see in absolute blackness, which is just a whole scientific and biological argument that I'm not ready or capable to talk about, any further than just beyond acknowledging that they can do that. Alright. Now, something interesting about the goblin race is just how fucking adaptable they are. They are just as adaptable, if not more so, than the human race. And that's like our whole shtick in fantasy, is that, we're humans. We could do a little bit of everything. Whoa-hoo! That's what humans sound like, I think. It's been a while since I've been outside. If you set a goblin tribe in the Arctic for long enough, they would grow fur and adapt to the cold. Okay, so what if we took that same goblin tribe and then put them in a humid forest? Over a long enough period, not only would they adapt to the heat, but they would evolve a way to climb trees, and their skin would change color to camouflage them from the predators in the forest. Oh, well, goblins aren't very strong, you might say, in a goofy little voice, because I don't know what you sound like. Look, I'll fireball the whole room of goblins. They have like 2 hit points. And you know, that's a fair observation, except that you're wrong. And you have a real tiny brain, and you look like a fool. Goblins are so adaptable that if they're exposed to magic for long enough, they will pass that immunity on to their kids, and those kids will become nilbogs. Which, yes, is the word goblin spelled backward. But they have a latent magical ability that allows them to not just adapt to magic, but eat it. They fucking eat magic, dude. They literally take your fireball and will heal from it. And yes, it's true that magic gets a little fucky with them, especially when it's healing, but magical attacks won't do anything to them. If you took a level 20 wizard and a nilbog and put them in a room, it will devolve into a knife fight. Anyway, kind of went off on a little tangent there, but you get the point. They're a race of highly adaptive, rapidly evolving goblinoids. And now that we have a rough idea of the biology of goblins, let's move on to... In Dungeons & Dragons, outside of a few adventure books, goblins are not explored too heavily. The average goblin society consists of a crude, loose-knit clan, usually led by a chief, or more likely a mob boss. Generally speaking, there are warlike people who will often raid and declare war on the people around them. And as previously stated, most goblin tribes delineate what tribe they're from by using their skin color. Due to a combination of both selective breeding and xenophobia, they will try to keep the same color of their offspring as the rest of the tribe, so the same yellows or greens or blues the other goblins in their tribes have. And speaking of offspring, most children don't get names in Goblin Society. Life in a warlike tribal society is hard, and, their life expectancy is short. So short that when they're born, they don't really have a delineation between one member and another. The only way that you get a name is if you do something incredibly impressive, or stupid. Doing that will earn you a title, and that title describes your deed in Goblin. So let's say you're a little goblin warrior. You managed to single-handedly take down 4 enemy combatants on your own, and a lot of other goblins noticed. Well, that might be enough to earn you a name. Something like Tordalsh the Lasher. Now let's say that you're a goblin hunter or gatherer, who everyone laughed at because you got a mushroom stuck up your nose one time. Well, you're Mold Nose now. Goblins also have a habit of trying to find a niche for themselves, as, an entire tribe. They're very good at that sort of us versus them mentality, and separating themselves from other tribes however possible. One of the biggest ways they do this is by creating traditions that differentiate themselves from other tribes. So let's say one tribe might be really good at, breeding wargs, and they take the moniker the Warg Riders. That's their tribe now. There might be tribe of goblins that lives out in the swamp, and they lick frogs to get hopped up on psychedelic poison to have the fearless bravery, and they take the name Toad Lickers. These traditions can be anything from legitimate wartime talents, like, capturing slaves, weapon proficiencies, improvised explosive, to anything, like just really liking fish. As long as it's a descriptive title of what their tribe does, they'll carry out that tradition to the best of their abilities. It is also worth mentioning that goblins don't have a particular set of religions. They don't have, a goblin god, at least not inherently. There are goblin gods that are worshipped, but it is not a guarantee. And while most goblins do not have a set religion, it is important, very important to know that almost all goblin tribes believe in reincarnation, which is what makes them incredibly dangerous enemies, because they don't fear anything. Maybe pain, but not death. Figuring that, hey, I'll just be right back. Give it a few years, I'll be born again. Have no qualms with dying at all for the greater good of the tribe. It mentions under a note on their race here that good goblin clans do exist, it's just that they're few and far between, and usually they're still a huge pain to live around. Just, instead of being attacked and raided, you're hit with pranks and practical jokes, which, some have claimed is worse than just being attacked. So, while they're not an inherently, quote, evil race, they are still generally disliked by the population at large, and in fact, most societies only accept goblins begrudgingly. Goblins in normal societies will, often become isolated, as there's few people who actually want anything to do with them, which usually leads to them joining local gangs or criminal groups for protection. And, before we wrap up this section on Goblin Society, it is just worth mentioning that goblins generally live up to their namesake. They're just relentless pranksters. They relish in the feeling of being more cunning than the people around them. They go out of their way to prank other societies, tribes, even just the people living around them. And their idea of what a prank is often leaves much to be desired, because one day it might be a whoopee cushion, other day it's you fell for the old fall into a 20-foot deep pit full of animal shit and upward facing spikes. Oh, that's a classic, man. You're a fucking dumbass. Now, history is a little rough on the old Goblinos. Depending on your setting, there's a lot of people who would happily take advantage of little pranksters like them, most notoriously the hobgoblins. A lot of goblin history, regardless of its setting, is these weak little, goblin fellas being captured, enslaved, and tamed by some other larger race that wants to use them as fodder. Beyond the unfortunate circumstances of their enslavement, goblins have a rather large and colorful history that they usually keep through oratory, song, and storytelling. That's usually how they pass down their stories, traditions, and tall tales. However, as would be expected, they have very little actual recorded history down anywhere, so many of their stories end up changing over the years. Events and people exaggerated for the sake of making it a good song or story. Yeah, this section's a lot smaller than I would have preferred it to be. Kinda regret making it a section now. Anywho, time to wrap this up, I rate D&D Goblins 1 out of 2. They're very good goblins. They're very, very premier goblins, and, you should like them. And think they're cool also. But yeah, this is me now. I'm a goblin YouTuber. I make goblin-related, content. By goblins, for goblins. You know how it is. Anyway, subscribe. Do all those YouTube things. And, maybe I'll keep making these. We'll find out. Who knows?